All right, so we are very excited to have Mindy Babarskis from the Library of Michigan here with us today to talk about using state documents using state documents and local history for your MHD project. So Mindy, I'm going to stop my share and you can go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen and kind of tell you a little bit about using, state documents, specifically from the state of Michigan. But, if you are from outside of Michigan, there are excellent state libraries throughout the country. Every state usually has a library or an archives that you could go to as well. So today we're going to talk about using state documents and local history for your MHD project. My name is Mindy Babarskis. I'm a librarian at the Library of Michigan. We are in Lansing, so we're actually a couple blocks away from the Capitol, pretty close to the Hall of Justice, where the Supreme Court of Michigan meets. And we were an institution created by the state of Michigan to collect, preserve, and provide access to the story of the state and to support libraries in their role as essential community anchors. All of that really means we are like the Library of Congress, how that functions for the US government. We're kind of like the Library of Congress for the state of Michigan. So our goal is to really capture everything about the state of Michigan by Michiganders, and also capturing, the state documents, the things that are created by the government of Michigan. So we've actually been around since 1828, same year as Historical Society of Michigan. So it's kind of fun, we're twins. And that was actually during the territorial days of Michigan. So we kind of got the full scope of the history of Michigan's government in our collection. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you would find at the Library of Michigan. We also have a number of online collections and materials that you can use, and we'll talk about those a little later as well. So if you're unable to come into Lansing, because I know that's sometimes not feasible if you live in Traverse City or Sault Ste. Marie, it's a little bit easier to use our online resources. But I'll tell you a little bit about what you'd find if you came into our building. We have the Michigan Documents Collection, which is those state documents. So they're created by the government of Michigan. The Michigan Collection, which is our local history. It's our state history, local history, and it's resources that are written by Michigan, by Michiganders about Michigan topics. So some of these too can be, fiction books and children's books written by Michigan authors. So it doesn't always have to be history, but a big portion of it is, of course, the history and that information about Michigan. We also have the Law Library, the Federal Documents Collection. So a lot of these are US government documents, which can also be very helpful for your research as well. The Law Library is focused on the laws of Michigan. So again, those could be really helpful, especially if you're talking about debate and diplomacy, which, that's the theme this year. And you wanted to look at maybe a specific law or something that was passed, a public act in Michigan, that might be a great way to look at it, is seeing how it changed and the debate of what happened. Rare books, and that's not just books, we have maps and different magazines and things that are really interesting, that are very old or just very unique. And then our main collection are books that would kind of help supplement or complement what you would find in our Michigan and our Michigan Docs collection. So let's say you were doing research on the Great Lakes, you'd want to know about the lakes in general and the environment and ecology of lake areas. So things like that would be in Maine. All right, so that's just kind of a brief overview of what we have. Now, for those who are unable to come into Lansing, we do have state documents available online in different places. So for the state of Michigan website, michigan.gov, that's a great place to start. These are now, most state documents are published digitally. So they're not printed and then bound in a book. They're now just digital. So oftentimes they're just born digitally. So the state of Michigan website is where you would find those press releases, different important information, executive orders are published on the michigan.gov, things about understanding the different agencies. So just going to michigan.gov and using their search tool is a really helpful way to find documents maybe on your topic. Now, there's also the Michigan Legislature website, and you notice it's mi.gov, so it's a little bit different. It's kind of its own separate website, but this is where you're going to find bills and public acts and committee records, things like that, that kind of let you see what is going on in the legislature, what bills are being debated, what are the House and Senate saying about these different things that they're trying to pass or they're debating about. So that is a great place to go, especially if you're looking at, a public act or some sort of policy or law that was passed that discuss it, that for the state of Michigan. That's a great place to go. Now, a lot of the older, what are they called? Senate and House journals. My brain stopped working for a second. A lot of the older Senate and House journals you're only going to find in print, and I'll tell you where you would go to find that later. Our LM Digital. Now, this is some of our collections that we have digitized. So we've scanned them and we've made them available for free online. And we have a number of, House and Senate journals that are on there, different bill analyses, and some other things as well. So feel free to explore that and see if we've got some items on your topic. Michiganology is from the Archives of Michigan, which we actually share a building with them. So they're the other half of the building, and that's where the Michigan History Center, that's the archives and the museum. And they have Michiganology, which is a number of Michigan records that have been made public. So these are going to be, documents from different state agencies, as well as some vital records like naturalization records for different people and some death certificates, things like that. And then there's the HotieTrust Digital Library. This is another free source of, it's a digitized historical collections, and a number of them are state documents. There's some federal documents in there, and there's just a lot of other good historical resources. And it's not all of them are fully available free, but a big portion are. So it can be a great place to find some more resources. And then people forget about this, but social media and websites for state agencies and politicians, those are Michigan documents. So oftentimes, let's say Governor Whitmer does a post on her Twitter, her official Twitter account, and it's about some sort of executive order or some announcement that she's making. That's considered a state document. So this is something that is coming from a state entity. All right. That just gives you kind of a brief overview of places you can find this online. And I'll be sure to share this with Amy after our presentation so that she can share it out with you guys if you want to come back and use this as a tool of like, where was that website again that she mentioned? So don't worry, you don't have to write down everything furiously. Now, for finding them in print, I know social media, it's kind of one of those things that we don't think about. It's a little odd, right? It kind of falls in that if it's official, it's a little bit unique. We think of just, oh, it's just fun and interesting, but no, it's also can be your official account. It's making an official statement. Now, for print documents, this is where you're going to find a lot more of those historical stuff. A lot of our state documents or, historical materials as a whole, there's so many that aren't found online or aren't found online for free. So you might have to actually go into a library or an archives and spend some time looking at these old books and digging into them. But don't worry, you don't have to do it alone. There's always librarians or archivists or teachers who are willing to help. So if you ever feel overwhelmed, don't forget to ask for help. But here's a couple places that you can go to find state documents in print. So at the Library of Michigan, just a few examples of what you might find. We've got the Michigan Manual, as you can see in our picture here. This is sort of the handbook and directory for state government. So we've got it going back to 1836, way back. We've got some really old manuals, get you that real good beginning history of Michigan's government. and then up to current day. So here's just a couple examples, and they will tell you about the different what state agencies are called, because sometimes they change their names. So you may be wanting to look at what was the health policy for, you know, a specific thing in 1920. Well, you're going to have to figure out what is the health department called at that time. It's probably not the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, which is what it is now. So you'll have to go into the Michigan manual to see what is it called? How do I even find stuff about it? And then there's also the House and Senate journals, which I mentioned briefly. That just kind of gives you the timeline for what happens during a session and what bills they talk about and what they bring up for a vote, what amendments they make. So it can kind of let you see how a bill changes and is amended over time. And it can be really interesting. It shows you what's going on at that time for those people. And then there's also state agency documents, you know, things created by the Michigan Department of Education or Health and Human Services. And then we've also got this excellent collection called the Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society Materials. Now, this was back in the 1800s. They realized a lot of these early, you know, pioneers to Michigan were starting to get old and we were losing their stories. So we decided, all right, we're going to sit down with these different people who have this early history of, you know, Michigan, and we're going to capture their stories. We're going to interview them. We're going to gather up these materials that we have, records and different important things, and we publish them in a long, you know, run of volumes, and they're very well indexed, so it's easy to find stuff. So that can be really helpful, especially if you're looking at history or specific places in Michigan. And then at the Archives of Michigan, which we share a building with, they're going to have more of that unpublished materials. So these are things like state censuses, you know, vital records, which are like birth, marriage, death certificates, records for different state agencies. So this is going to be, you know, that nitty gritty details of like those meeting notes and what was going on behind the scenes. That's stuff that isn't, you know, published and then sold in bookstores. This is stuff that's just created, these documents that are created by government, but they're not really, you know, passed out to everybody, but they're saved so that people can come in and look at them. So that's really kind of the difference between us. They're going to have more of that unpublished. We'll have that published materials, some of which can be hard to get a hold of too. Any questions so far? I mean, I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. Feel free, you can unmute or you can just make a mention in chat.
I do have a question.
Sure. Yeah.
Because the Michigan Pioneer and Historical Society materials, we have a collection of that. We have a whole big set of that at our office.
Oh,
so
good.
I wonder if there might be more of those in other places around the state where, you know, like if they couldn't come down to see them at the Library of Michigan, they might be able to check if it's a bigger city around them or a historical organization. They might be able to see if they're available there. But another question with that is, like, could students come across that when they're doing research online for them to know to look in that source? Does that make sense? Like, I don't know if the index is somewhere online or some of the articles or things in there might show up that people could find them that way.
There might, I mean, I don't know of a place, but it's not saying that there might not be out there. I would say in order to find if there's a place nearby you that has it, there's a couple places you could look. So there's mel.org, MEL.org. That's Michigan Electronic Library is what it stands for. You can search, they have like a big catalog, library catalog, where you can search to see what books are available at any of the libraries that participate in MEL. And that's a big portion of the libraries in Michigan. So if you looked up Pioneer and Historical Society, you could see what places would have a listing for that. And you could see if there's a place nearby you. If not, you could also talk with your public library. Some libraries are using the, it's called the ride. So it's like, I request a book from a library in Sault Ste. Marie, and then I have that book delivered to the Library of Michigan in Lansing, because that's my library. So then I don't have to go up there, but they bring it to me. Well, some libraries are participating in that where they're asking for books from other libraries, or they're sending their books out to other libraries. So you can always check with your library whether they do that, if they're doing that right now. With COVID, things got a little funky. So it's, some are doing it, some are not. Another place we can look is called worldcat.org. I know it sounds funny. You're like, a cat from the world? No, it's for catalog. So worldcat.org is it's kind of like a big library catalog for a number of institutions and libraries throughout the world. And you could search whatever topic you're looking for and see, is there any place that's nearby me that might have a copy I could get? So that's going to be even bigger. That's not just going to be Michigan. That'll go to Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Germany, all these different places. So if you live, maybe you're down by the southern border of Michigan, and it'd be easier to just go over to Ohio to use one of their libraries. Well, that could be another way you could look and see what's available.
And I think, and Lynn, D'Angelo, a teacher of ours.
Yes.
Yep. And I know too, a lot of universities may have collections as well. For example, up in Houghton, the Michigan Tech, they hold all of the tax records for that whole entire area in their archives at their museum. So those are technically state or federal documents, but they're the housing agency for them. So reaching out to some college libraries, big schools like that, they may have some interesting state documents or have the actual printed copy that you may be able to find online, but they have the printed copy, and that's always great.
Which might be easier to see. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I would say talking to your local college is another great option. And then your public libraries, reach out to whatever institutions are near you. You'd be surprised at what's available. That's all right. It's great to see, though. I'm glad that we know that, hey, there's some great libraries helping our students. That's what we love to see. All right. So that's just, those are a couple places, at least in Lansing. But obviously, talk with your local institutions and see what they have available. I mean, it's always amazing to see what collections are out there. All right, let me just go ahead and switch to the next slide. Now, I'm going to talk about our state and local history. This is kind of a different piece. So this isn't something that's created by the government of Michigan. This is something that's going to be, it's about Michigan, it's about the region, it's about the people, but it was just created by, private or a nonprofit publishing company, not the state agency. So we have a couple places where you can go to find some great local history, state history online. We have a number of databases. I'll just show you this real quick. I think I'm going to have to switch what screen I'm sharing though. So let me make a quick change. Screen sharing, new share. There we go. Okay, so this is our list of databases. Now, databases are really, they're search engines that libraries will pay for to give you access to certain published information. So it's a little hard to describe them. They kind of work like Netflix. We pay this database like Netflix, they're the platform, and they will give us access to different content. They didn't always produce the content. They got it from other places, but they're making it available to us. Of course, it's never free, unfortunately. But here's a list of some of the great resources we have here. And this is available to anybody who has a Library of Michigan card, which is available to any Michigan resident. So even if you're under 18, you're still able to apply for this. We have a little online application form. Please feel free to fill it out. It takes a few days for us to just turn over and process it and get you all set up. And then we will email you back with a library card number and a PIN, and that will allow you to access one of our databases. So just to give you an example, we've got Detroit News in here. We've got the Grand Rapids Press, Michigan History Magazine, some great stuff, Newspaper Archive. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you with the Detroit Free Press, just to give you an example of what it would look like. When I click on it, it should pop up with, oh, since I'm clicked into my VPN, it doesn't pop up with the enter your library card number and PIN because it remembered me. But this is what it would look like. And I could search in here and I could find some newspapers, which if you're going to stay for the next session, my colleague is going to show you how to search our online newspaper resources. So I won't go there today, but that just gives you an example of some of the things that are available to you with our Library of Michigan card. Let me just pop back in here, scroll down to where we were at. Okay. All right. So our LM Digital, which I had talked about before, this is some of our collections that we've digitized, and there are some we're also helping other institutions digitize and put up on this platform. So we have some materials for the Presqu'île, which is way north, nice little island. And so in Michigan, so there's a lot of great history there. Oops, went too fast. And then there's a lot of other resources, the MEL, which I mentioned before. Not only can you request books and see what books are available at other places, but you can also access these amazing databases. I would really recommend the History Reference Center. It gives you it's a good background, kind of introduce you to some historical events and topics and peoples you might need to know. And then of course the Michigan History Magazine, which used to be a state document. It actually used to be published from the Library of Michigan. And then in about the 90s, it went over to the Historical Society of Michigan. And they continue to do it today, and they do an excellent job. And there's some amazing historical articles in there about so many different topics. And that's available to you for free. So mel.org, you don't have to get a library card for, as long as you're in Michigan. If you go to mel.org, it's going to look at your computer and say, yep, you've got a Michigan IP address, you can access this, no problem. So these I really recommend. And of course, the Historical Society of Michigan, they have a lot of resources on their website. They've got a great list of, here's some other places you can go, here's some other resources. So I'd recommend checking out their website as well. And then my last plug is for the Clark Historical Library's digital Michigan newspaper portal. And this is just a list by county in Michigan of all the newspapers for different cities that are available online, whether it's free or you have to pay for it. And I have found amazing articles for free from all over the state through that place. And I'm giving this to Amy after the session, so we can share this out to you guys and you can come back and click on any of these links. So these are just some top places to find state and local history online. We also have a number that are available in print at the Library of Michigan. We've got a whole page just dedicated to Michigan materials. They've got like bibliographies and book lists for if you're researching different counties or different topics in Michigan. We have so many books. Oh, good, you got a folder, great. So we got a folder with all those resources. And then of course the Michigan newspapers, which my colleague after me will talk way more about and show you some cool things. But this webpage just shows you, hey, we've got this giant collection of newspapers on microfilm, which if you want to feel like a real researcher, use microfilm. It's just this little reel of film, and you put it in a machine and then it projects it onto a computer screen, and you can just scroll through and you see newspapers. It'll store like years of newspapers on that little reel. And it's a lot of fun, but it definitely makes you feel like a real researcher. And then of course, getting in touch with the Historical Society of Michigan, they've got contact information for historical societies. So you could find your local historical society. Oftentimes they have little libraries or museums that could help you learn about your area. And then the Michigan History Center, which we share a building with, has got the museum and the Archives of Michigan, so many great resources. And then of course, public libraries. I would say public and academic, as we talked about. See who's nearby you, what big institutions, what big universities, what local libraries. A lot of them have local history collections, which can really give you a good insight, not only into specific events that happened around town, but how world events or national events were perceived and talked about by people who grew up in your area, which can really give you that great perspective. How did people react in your hometown when the World War II ended? Things like that. You can kind of see their perspective. Okay, so I've kind of given you that whole rundown of where to find things, what examples we might have. But let's talk a little bit about that. What is a primary source? What is a secondary source? Because I know that's the part that confuses everybody, and it can be pretty confusing. So we're just going to use, these are definitions that I got from the National History Day, or sorry, Michigan History Day. They have a worksheet and some helpful information. So the thing that you want to remember is materials that were created at the time of the event, or materials created by those with firsthand experience of the event, are considered primary source documents. And we'll kind of have some examples and walk through what that might look like. Secondary sources are materials that were created after the event. These materials might tell you about an event, person, time, or place, but they're created by someone without firsthand experience. So that's really important, because there are primary sources that were created after the event, but they were created by people who had experienced it. So like I had to do this for a research project when I was in high school. I had to interview someone I knew who had lived through World War II and asked them about their experience. So I talked with my grandfather, and he told me about his experience on a ship in the South Pacific. So and then I would write down that story. Even though it was many years after the ending of World War II, I was able to, that's still a primary source document because it was his experience. And he was the one that had that firsthand experience. Oh, whoops. Now, the important thing to know is, yes, a source can be both primary and secondary, depending on how you use it. So context is always important. And if you're not sure, you can ask a teacher or librarian. I'll talk a little more about that. It's easier to see when a source can be both primary and secondary when we have examples. So let's kind of talk about some of those examples. All right. Here's a primary source document from our state documents collection. This was a report created by a government task force, and it's relaying their research and their findings. It's a snapshot of people at that time. So it was, this firsthand experience. They're doing interviews. They're compiling this information. It's their original research. They're saying, yep, this is what's going on today in Michigan, and we're experiencing it. Where it can get confusing, though, is there are a number of charts and maps within this, because they also used other sources to sort of bolster their research and what they were finding. So we've got this lovely map showing the treaties, the treaty lines, and it was from a different source. So if I were to cite that source, even though this greater source, it's considered primary, but if I'm citing that chart, it has now become a secondary source for me, because the chart is not originally from this document. It has been repurposed, it has been cited, or has been reused, reprinted. That's the word I'm looking for. So you can see how it can get a little confusing. So it's something to keep in mind. It all depends on what you're using and how you're using it. All right, so let's do some more kind of examples. Okay. Oops, went too fast. There we go. Now, state documents as secondary sources. So this was presented by the Michigan History Magazine and is called African Americans You Need to Know. It was not created by people with firsthand experience. These are little biographies, like very short biographies about different African Americans from Michigan. And since it was biographies, not autobiographies, it would be a secondary source. Since it's not being created, it's not the words of the different people. So I will say a resource like this is great because you want to look at the bibliography or references at the end of the book, and it can show you, hey, this is where we got our information. These are the primary sources we pulled from. Maybe we were able to access the letters from this specific person, or we watched an, a speech they gave, things like that. That would be a really helpful tool for you. Just look at what research sources they looked at, and that can help you continue with your research. Now for state and local history sources, if they're primary, it doesn't always mean that they were published at or shortly after these events took place. So the news article on the left was an interview. They interviewed a number of African Americans who fled slavery. And this actually was published though in 1894, which was, 30 years after the end of slavery in America. So obviously it didn't happen. They weren't interviewed shortly after it happened, but because these stories are the firsthand accounts of people who had experienced slavery and then escaped, that is considered a primary source document. The published memoir on the right, this is something that is primary source. It's talking about her life. It's her memoir. It's an autobiography. Even though it's after the fact, it didn't happen. She's not telling you exactly what the experience was at the time. She's looking back on her life. She had that firsthand experience though. Now, where it could get interesting though, is she's talking about her experience with gray owl. Now, if I were doing a project on gray owl, let's say I wanted to write about gray owl, I could not use her memoir as a primary source. It would be a secondary source in the sense that it's not actually gray owl. It's not his words, his experience. It's someone who had an experience with him. So it can get kind of confusing depending on what your topic is. All right. Oops. Now for secondary sources, I just used a biography that we have from one of our former governors. He's called Soapy fondly, and he always had a little bow tie. This was not created by people with firsthand experience. It's a biography instead of an autobiography. So it's kind of obvious that it's a secondary source. Where people can get confused is the author will use primary sources. We'll have quotes, from letters that they read, or maybe from Soapy's diary, and different, primary sources of Soapy's words and his experience. But it would still be considered a secondary source, even if I quoted those specific quotes by Soapy. And I got this from our National History Day website. Quotes from historical figures, which are found in secondary sources, are not considered primary sources. The author of the book has processed the quotation, selecting it from the original source. Without seeing the original source for yourself, you don't know if the quotation is taken out of context. So, that's something that's important to remember because, you see that all the time with movie reviews where you'll just see like one word. They'll be like, excellent. But are they saying that this movie was excellent, or are they saying, well, the soundtrack was excellent, but the movie was terrible? Well, the way that they're just taking these little snippets of words, they could be taking them out of context, and you're not actually learning about the film itself. You're just getting whatever that perspective was by the person who chose those quotes. So it's their perspective, not necessarily what's actually being said in the primary source. All right. How do people feel about that? Any questions about what I've talked about so far? And again, I can't stress enough, if you're ever confused about whether your source is a primary or secondary source, talk with your teacher, talk with a librarian, an archivist, anybody who has that knowledge will really want to help you make sure you've got the right information.
And I'll just say, if anyone has a question, please unmute and ask. But I will say too that with History Day, that's where you can use your annotation when you do your annotated bibliography. If you have a source where it's kind of tricky like that, where you could say, the quote in your annotation, the quote was a primary quote, but I took it from a secondary source, which is why I put it under secondary sources. And that's fine. And so what I tell judges when I'm doing training to them is that the student, as long as they can present a strong argument for why they use that, that's really important. Getting bogged down into, is it truly a secondary or primary source? That wouldn't stop anyone from advancing in the contest, right? So it's a learning thing to try and figure out what the best way to do it.
Exactly. And it is tricky. I mean, a lot of it, as I said, it comes down to context. How are you using the source? Because it might change depending on what you're using it for. So yeah, I would say talk with people who know better. And then if you're still kind of confused, like Amy said, put in that annotation, explain why you did what you did. And that would make sense to the judges.
And I just have to put my plug in, secondary sources, primary sources aren't always better than secondary sources. There's nothing wrong with having good, that example you just showed is a good secondary source. It's been published, it's gone through review, it's, you know what I mean? So that's a good source and it's okay. Just because it's primary doesn't mean it's a better source.
Right. And that's something too, is that, I mean, how many of us have met someone who, when they talk about whatever they went through, they have, they're coming from their own perspective, right? They're seeing things through their own lens. They're not necessarily seeing the whole truth of the situation. They just have their vision of what went on. They don't necessarily know all the other stuff that's going on as well. So that's why you don't want to just rely on one source, whether it's secondary or primary, because you need to get a fuller vision of what's going on. How did it affect people who are different than this one person? And it can be very interesting. It shows our thought process, our perspective, our bias. And that's why we say use lots of sources, get a fuller picture of what's going on. Now I do have a couple, these are a little quiz we have just to kind of help us think through that primary or secondary source. I grabbed a couple or 3 pictures of state documents. So, and I've listed them right here. We've got a Michigan bibliography, and this has got a catalog of books, maps, manuscripts, and miscellaneous materials relating to Michigan. I'm going to give that a shorter title real quick. And then I also have the Michigan Department of Education website. And then our final picture is the Michigan State Capitol, a self-guided tour. So this is a little tour booklet for the Michigan Capitol. So what do you think? You can go ahead and type it into chat if you want, or you can unmute and say it over the microphone. Do we think that the Michigan bibliography is a primary or a secondary source? You can just, if you want to type, you can put primary, secondary. It doesn't matter. Anyone have a guess?
I'm not seeing anything. They might be a little shy and that's okay.
It's all right. Yeah, that's fine. I was like, I'll just give you time. Let you think through. If not, I'll go ahead and we'll move on to the next one. All right. So think about that. Would that Michigan bibliography be primary, secondary? Michigan Department of Education website. Do we think primary or secondary? And then our Michigan State Capitol self-guided tour, primary or secondary? I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. You can type it in if you want. And if not, I'll just show you. All right. Okay. So the answers are, well, if it lets me move to the next thing, there we go. Our Michigan bibliography is a secondary source. So this is a source that says, hey, here are all these other resources you can look at that are about Michigan, that would tell you about our history and all sorts of information. So it's not, of course, someone coming from a firsthand account of, the founding of Michigan or Michigan, a specific event in Michigan history. But it is a really helpful tool for you as you're doing your research. If you come across a bibliography that's on your topic or related to your topic, take a look at the resources that they list for you, because those are going to be helpful places where you can go to do research. They're pretty much giving you a list of, hey, you're doing research on this topic, check out these 10 books. And they've kind of done that first part for you. So that can be a really helpful tool if you come across it. Now you'll notice with number 2, our Michigan Department of Education website, it's both primary and secondary. And that is because the website itself is a primary source. This is something published by the Department of Education. So this is their state documents. They're putting that out there. This is their website. They've created it. They've published it. They're the primary source. But if I were to click on different links, some of those documents and links are going to be primary sources, like their press releases, their policies. But some of them are going to be secondary sources. So, here's we're linking to some research done by somebody else on this topic. So it depends really on what you want to use from this website. So that's one of those where context matters, and what you choose and how you use it matters. But again, a really helpful tool. The Michigan State Capitol self-guided tour is secondary because it's taking all this information about the Capitol, it's giving you that historical information compiled from different sources and packaging it into a nice little booklet so that you can learn about the Capitol. But it's not that firsthand information. All right. So here's one for local history. So we've got the El Calendario de Michigan 2006, and then an annotated and indexed bibliography of documents, the Metro Detroit Hispanic Directory from 2013, and Latinos in Michigan. So looking at these 4 different things, what would we think? Which one would be primary? Which one would be secondary? Are there any that would be both? It's a tricky one. Some of them are tricky, I'll be honest. All right. Yeah, so even our number 1 is a tricky one. That calendar, it's primary and secondary. So within it, it has information about the Artes Unidas, and it's so it's got some information that's specific to their institution, their organization, but within it, there are pictures and art that are created by other artists, and so it's those artists' primary source, but it's being repackaged and reprinted in their calendar. So depending on what I use from the calendar, it could be primary or secondary. So that's a tricky one. Again, an annotated index bibliography, that would be secondary, but again, another resource for you to use. If I'm looking at Hispanics in Michigan, this would be a great resource for me to find more research on that topic. The Metro Detroit Hispanic Directory 2013. This is actually primary because it is a directory of Hispanic businesses in Detroit published at that time. So it's there, they're saying, yep, here's our business. This is our directory of this snapshot of who we are and where we are. The Latinos in Michigan is a secondary source. So it's compiling all this research and packaging it into a little book to say, here we've done the research, here you go. This kind of pulls together all these different sources for you. Does that all make a little sense? Are there any questions about some of these and you're like, well, I don't understand why that's primary or secondary?
The calendar was a tricky one for me. I thought primary, but then it depends on how you used it.
Exactly. And so that one too, I was like, oh, this is a primary. And then I was like, oh, as I'm looking through it, of course I couldn't show all the pictures. I wish I could, but the pictures, they're not all published by that organization. They asked to use them from other artists. So I was like, oh, that one would have got me, you know? So some of these, again, you know, asking for help, figuring out how am I using this? What's my context for it? That's fun. And I'm going to leave you with a few research tips, both for your online research and your, you know, your print research. For e-resources, that mel.org, again, highly recommend checking that website out. There's a lot of great resources for students and teachers alike. The most important thing I would say when you're searching in a database is it's really important that you narrow your search to the most important words from your research topic. So I don't know about you, but when I search in Google, I oftentimes just put in a big question. Like when I'm trying to figure out how many teaspoons equal how many tablespoons, or, you know, I'm trying to do stuff like that, I'll put in like the full question. And unfortunately, databases don't work in the same way as Google. And so they get very confused when there's all those words. So we really need to make sure that we think about what are the most important ideas for my research topic. So if I were researching, you know, the detrimental effects of social media on teens in America. Okay, that's a lot of words. So I need to focus in on what's really what do I want to discover more on? So I would say social media use, teens, negative effects, something like that. And that's going to give me less results, but the results are going to be relevant to my research. So if you're ever confused about that, or if you're coming up with 0 results when you're typing in all these words, try taking a few out that don't seem necessary and see if that gives you more. If you are getting way too many results, try adding more words in there to make sure you're only getting those search results that are relevant to your research. When you're searching in Google and Wikipedia, and yes, you are hearing from a librarian that you can search in Google and Wikipedia. They are great tools to get you started. I highly recommend, if you look at Wikipedia, look at those references at the end of the Wikipedia articles. That's really the most important thing about Wikipedia, is that it gives you some of those resources that you can then go check and see, you know, are these what they say they are? Is this actually quality research? Are these resources that I can use? And I can also get you a good brief overview of the topic and maybe some other important words or people related to it. Google, I mean, that's going to bring up websites, and there are a lot of excellent websites on different topics. I would say oftentimes it's not always the case, but I find that it can be more reliable websites when they're .gov, .edu, or .org. Now, you still always have to evaluate what you find to make sure it's accurate and quality, and a quality resource for your project. And again, talk to your librarian or your teacher to help you with figuring out whether this is something that's reliable. But those, you know, there are a lot of excellent websites that are out there, or articles that are free, that have a great job of dealing with your topic, but you know, you have to find them through Google, and that's okay. We just have to always be aware. And then when we search library catalogs to find books and more, you know, there's lots of helpful things in there. There's great encyclopedias that'll give you a good background on your topic. There's great secondary sources about your topic. There can be great primary sources, you know, diaries, memoirs. But it's always great if you find a book that has something on your topic, look at those indexes in the back of the book. You don't have to read the entire book. You only really have to look at the stuff that is relevant to what you're researching. And then also look at the table of contents in your book to see, oh, here, what pages are mentioning my topic and what chapters are about my topic. So let the book work for you. And again, ask your teacher or librarian for help. I mean, I keep saying it because it's true. All right. Now I'm just going to leave our contact information up there, but are there any questions? Any more, you know, you need some clarification on anything?
Maybe any sources you've come across that you know, weren't 100% sure of how they should be classified? I will say what people are thinking, just a little plug. Earlier, Mindy mentioned that on our website, we had a list of historical organizations. On the district information page of the MHD section of our website, at the bottom of every district, I have like a link to a Google spreadsheet that has every organization in that district organized by county. So if you know where if you're looking for a certain town or something happened, your topic happened in a certain area, if you can find out what county it's in, then you can go to that in it's an alphabetic order by county and kind of look through there. And if we have website information, we have that on there. If we have contact information, it hasn't been updated very recently, but it still is a good place to start. And so that's one way of kind of looking locally in the area. And it doesn't mean that where you have to live, you might live in Saginaw and be doing research on something that happened in Kalamazoo. So then you would go and look there. So just a little plug for that.
And I hope this was helpful and it at least got you thinking about places you can look and resources that you can use. But I'll go ahead and let you guys prepare for the next session. But if you have any other questions, last chance, pick the brain of a librarian.
And you can always, I know everyone in here will have my email. You can always send questions to me if you think of something later for Mindy, and I can forward that information on to her. And I just want to say thank you to Mindy for joining us this morning. That was really interesting and really helpful. And we appreciate your time, and we will get ready for the next session. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great day.